Fabulous. So welcome everybody. This is Roma Gaster, and I'd like to also introduce my co-facilitator or co-presenter again for this evening, Sarah. So Sarah, would you like to say something?
I'd just like to say good evening.
Thank you. Thank you. And as Adele mentioned in the intro, that this is the second in our series of webinars. Tonight we are focusing on the controlling dimension. So this is our deep dive around the circle, and we're focusing on controlling this evening. And for those of you that were on the webinar last time, and for those of you that weren't, you may already recall that one of the key design criteria of the leadership circle is, and one of the key points of leverage is that we enable clients to understand that ultimately that it's all about strengths, that there is nothing to judge. The key is to actually understand even our reactive tendencies have enormous gifts and contain the seeds which we can grow into incredible gifts in the creative. So it's been purposely designed as a strengths-based model. As Adele said, we've been through our protocols already. We will allow space during this webinar for questions as well as for comments. And towards the end, we'll talk about the next webinar. So just as a quick refresher, when we're talking about the reactive and the creative, it applies to the leadership circle profile as well as to the manager edition, and indeed it also applies to the leadership culture survey. So in relation to the leadership circle profile and the manager edition, as you know, that there are some minor distinctions, and we will go through those just very quickly again. But before we do that, we're looking at the leadership circle and the manager edition as a structure of mind. And one of the key frames that we use in the leadership circle is structure determines performance. And as this image represents, these two people are standing on a structure that is supported on either side. And indeed, our structures are actually like that. And so Sarah and I, in preparing for these webinars, we actually thought, well, what is a structure? And Sarah, I mean, did you want to share a little bit about your thought in terms of structure and how it applies to, development and our minds and how we show up?
Well, I think the challenge often is to think of concepts as a structure. So whatever concepts we hold, whatever beliefs we hold, anything that actually creates a sense of order or place, that is in effect a structure. So I think it's lovely, Roma, when we spoke about this, you highlighted, I wonder what beliefs these two people have to stand on a structure like that. So even what's in their mind determines whether they could in fact stand on that structure. So that structure is determining their choice, really, because some people wouldn't be able to do that because their mental concepts would prevent them even seeing somebody standing there. So I think they're very powerful influences, yeah.
And indeed, when we talk about the creative competencies, which are the well-researched competencies, the essential strategies and behaviors and skills required for effective leadership and enduring business performance. This is a structure. Again, we have a structure here, and we know that this structure is highly correlated to both leadership effectiveness as well as business performance. And when we look at the reactive tendencies, indeed, they are tendencies. I was working with a group today, and there was some people who were new to this and were starting to question, well, what do you mean? What's wrong with autocratic? Or, don't we need this? Surely we need this in the business, etc., etc. and suddenly watched the defenses drop down when they realized that everything in this circle, everything in the leadership circle is a strength. It's a gift and it's a strength. And in the reactive tendencies is the when we sit with and we can work with and we can help our clients understand, and indeed ourselves understand, when our structure is starting to manage us and us not managing it, and the overextended and underutilized competencies can usually be traced to some of the limiting beliefs and assumptions. And you heard Sarah just talking about some of the beliefs. What are the beliefs that it allows those people to stand on that rock, whereas some people couldn't do that? And just to help us get in underneath our habits and thoughts and patterns and behaviors, which again are another structure that determine how we show up on the outside. And then that translates into the decisions we make, the relationships we have, the outcomes that we get. And so, when we look at the leadership circle profile, we have a structure. We have creative competencies and reactive styles and tendencies. 18 key competencies, 18 creative competencies, 11 reactive styles, and in a circle, 8 dimensions. This is a framework for understanding how we show up. Leadership Circle Manager Edition, same thing, less competencies in the creative, 12, 9 reactive styles, and 6 inner circle dimensions. But one of the things that distinguishes, and Sarah, you might want to talk to this, but one of the key things that distinguishes the leadership circle, and often you will get asked, and we get asked frequently, what makes the leadership circle different compared to other 360s or structures or frameworks? And Sarah, you might want to talk to this in terms of the meaning making and what's underpinning the leadership circle profile.
Yeah, so as you'll be aware from certification, these adult stages of development, we can't move through to different levels without gaining the benefits from the previous level. They are actually the foundation. So understanding that the meaning making at the reactive level is very much defined by limiting beliefs and assumptions that have kept us safe and secure and enabled us to survive. And in fact, it's in the reactive that we develop all of the capability that the gift actually delivers. So the reactive, for instance, serves us in terms of acquiring capability that then becomes a foundation, and only the limiting elements are really what prevents us from being able to handle a level of complexity that, for instance, at the creative level, we can handle. So by that being a platform by which we can grow through to the next stage of development. And it's only when we come up against the limits of that stage that we really start to be interested in what's on offer in the next stage. So that's a very potent way for us to... Have you still got me? I just lost my screen. So
yes, you're still there.
You can still hear me. Oh, right.
Yes.
I'm in a remote area, so something just happened. So okay. I lost my screen. Yeah, so that impulse starts coming through, and I think it's lovely what you were saying, Roma, because when people can actually start to see what's going on at that particular stage of development, they can then have an objective relationship with it rather than a subjective, and that then allows them to move through, and you can actually start to see the gifts and the liabilities in a different way, which then gives you actually more access to move to the next stage of development.
And I love the framework that Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy and Jennifer Garvey Berger put on this. And this is some of the key frames, or the key framework for understanding how we learn and grow and how that can change over time. And, this obsession with, just this vertical development and indeed, development for the complex times that we're in, the capacity for us to actually shift our consciousness and to shift our internal operating system in order to continue to show up in a way that's effective is one of the key distinguishers that sits and underpins the leadership circle as a framework. And so to understand and to help people understand that each operating system, as Sarah mentioned, in and of itself is is has its integrity, has enormous gifts and has enormous strengths. And in today's times, we actually understand that when we bump up against those limits, that can be quite painful. And it's often at this time when individuals are grateful for having support and having somebody like one of us as an executive coach in order to be able to assist them in that zigzag journey through. And sometimes it's helping them and holding them in the space of understanding how to get better at reacting less. And once that starts to allow the fears and the angst and the anxiety to drop away, and then to actually progress and help us grow greater perspective and get a shift on what we were once subject to now becomes an object of our reflection. And that's tonight is what we will be focusing on. Last webinar we focused on the complying in terms of looking at conservative pleasing and belonging and the whole complying aspect of how it shows up in us as individuals, both as strengths and when it's overdialed. The whole area around protecting, if we're going anti-clockwise around the circle, we've got distance, critical, and arrogance. And tonight we will be focusing on autocratic, ambition-driven, perfect, that actually shows up in the reactive structure as controlling. Sarah, you might want to, just remind, because I know some people will have listened to the webinar before and some won't have, and you've all been through certification. So just a quick, refresher of the Karen Horney's 3 primary coping strategies.
Yeah, so Karen Horney did her research in the 40s and 50s, and actually she came from Europe, and one of the things that she was interested in was is this consistent through different cultures? And in fact, that's what she found, that this is not a cultural sensitive tendency. All human beings have 3 fundamental ways of coping when they start to feel insecure or at risk in some way. So the way that they react to protect themselves, keeps themselves safe, get their needs met. And particularly that's really how it begins in our character structure. So these are things that actually form in our formative years and develop our character and the structure of our character. So the first tendency, particularly when we're little, when we want something or need something, is to try and get people to give it to us. So we do this, how do we get people to like us? So how do we get people to want to move towards us? And that's the complying tendency. And we talked about that last time. So following the rules, being nice, being easy to be with, fitting in, going along to get along, all of those sorts of things. If that fails us, then and we don't get our needs met and we continue to feel at risk or insecure, unsafe or unvalued, then we lean into the next one, which is the controlling tendency. So we search for our own authority, our sense of power, our sense of agency, and that's where the controlling tendency comes from. So we really want to get in contact with our power to get things for us. And so we talk about moving against people. So I'm in a competitive relationship for the resources or the things that I need. And so there's that sense of urgency that comes through and sense of power. And then the third one is the protecting tendency. And that's when those other two have not achieved the needs being met and feeling safe and secure. And that's the tendency to withdraw or to go distant, to remove yourself from the situation. And in fact, often to go into the head, and that's the primary resource at that stage, to try and work out, how do I get my needs met? So tonight we're going to be talking about the controlling one, which is the sense of power and agency, and how do I find my strength and my fighting elements, if you like.
Beautiful. Thank you. So let's dive in, shall we? Into
Sounds
the
like
whole
a good
area, the
idea.
controlling tendencies. Yeah, let's dive into that. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend some time, like we did last time, looking at various elements in relation to controlling. And I won't go through these because you can read them on the screen here. We're going to take this one step at a time, and we will go through each one of these. So let's begin with what are some of the, when we're looking at the controlling structure, character structure, some of the, and remember here what we're talking about is when it's dialed up. Later on in the webinar, we will actually spend some time considering with compassion the perspective in relation to when we're not at risk, when we're feeling secure, when we're not under pressure, when our sense of self-worth is not being threatened, and we can access the gifts and the strengths. We will spend time focusing on that. The earlier part of the webinar, we will look at when these tendencies have got us, when they're compulsive, when they're dial up, when we are overusing or over relying on these strengths. And when we look at and remember that the core operating equation of the reactive tendencies are around identity, safety, and worth. And so in the controlling, there is this need, an underlying need to show up as being flawless, to drive for results, to actually get results, even if it's in an aggressive way, to be highly ambitious and even dictatorial in the way that we go about things. So we call this, one of the ways that we talk about this is we call this needy will. And in this, I need to be, and I know this one extremely well myself, I need to be perfect. I need to excel and prove myself, get results at any cost, take charge. Self-worth, when our controlling tends to be dialed up, is based on performance, on being seen to achieve results. When it comes to me, I must be in control and I must be seen as the strong one. So when the needy will is really dialed up, then there tends to be this identification with strength and also overachievement. And I'm the one that actually allows us to get there. I'm the one that, and we'll talk about some of the beliefs and assumptions. We move on and we have a look at.
And that saying, Roma, if it's to be, it's up to me. That kind of really expresses it.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to talk about the mindset piece, Sarah?
Sure.
Not dissimilar in some ways to complying, but there are some nuances.
Yeah. So here in the mindset, you can see here there is this sense, very much sense of scarcity. So there's like fighting for resources. So if I don't get them, then I won't be able to come out on top. And mistrusting others' motives. So not seeing the goodness in people or not expecting there to be goodness in people. And if you think about that in terms of if I've tried the the pleasing, connecting, trying to get into a relationship, and that fails, it makes sense then that I would mistrust others. So this very great sense of I have to win. So it's playing not to lose, because the fear is in the losing. So it also creates, of course, a thing where winning is hollow as well. Isn't it? It's really about resolving this angst that's present, but absolutely not wanting to be aware of this angst. So the fear is really strong that something bad will happen to me if I don't come out on top, if I don't take charge and control the situation. And the really almost heavy emphasis underlined is I must not be weak, because only the strong survive. So weakness is intolerable. Um,
It's not an
Strength,
option.
yeah, weakness is not an option. Um, and being associated with weakness is not an option either,
Mm.
which is why you can get this tremendous polarization with complying. Um, so there can be a deep intolerance of anything that appears to be soft or
Mm.
not strong. So
Beautifully
it's
said.
it's a real grip on the person that's experiencing it. I know this very well myself too. I'm not very attractive when it gets hold of me.
And interestingly, I mean, the thing that I love about this so much is that, that this delusion that, that people aren't going to see this stuff going on, and yet physiologically, it can be quite obvious. Um, in terms of the controlling. And what we will do is we'll open this up in a minute to any comments or thoughts or suggestions, because Sarah and I had some fun in terms of what is some of the body posture and the non-verbals. So we haven't even opened our mouth yet, but how do people know when we're in that high controlling mode? Well, of course, there's this sense of really big energy, this expanded energy that it's kind of obviously visible. um, I was watching people coming into the room today, and some of them, and it's interesting to notice how were they coming in? Was there a sense of gravity? Where was their center of gravity? And it was obvious to me. I mean, again, it's not hard, because sometimes all I need to do is look in the mirror. This dominating presence, or this really overbearing and kind of sense of upright body posture. Um, and often it, that when somebody is in high control, and I know that there are times when I can feel this, that maybe the energy that I'm taking up a disproportionate amount of space when that controlling has got me and it's managing me. We talked about the smile, and that grimace or that smile that we talked about the crocodile smile, so through the teeth, but it might be smiling, but underneath that you've got this sense of, wow, look out here, I'm about to get got, or the glaring or the penetrating or the challenging eyes. Sometimes we'll see people. I mean, I remember it didn't last very long, I might say, right up front, but I worked very briefly with somebody who was hugely controlling. And I can still remember the body posture, and that sitting in the office opposite this person with their hands clasped behind the back of their neck and with their feet up on the table, and just this whole sense of I'm in charge and I'm in control here. And whenever he spoke, there were these very deliberate and strong hand gestures. So it makes me I kind of laugh, because sometimes I catch myself and I think, oh, my hand gestures are actually starting to get the pointing of the finger, that whole sense of pointing of the finger and things like that. So I'd love to just open up a little bit. Is there anybody on the webinar this evening that would like to add in anything? That what we're providing here are some examples, but they're by no means exhaustive or exhausted. Is there anybody that's got their hand up, Adele, that might want to
No, they're all being a little shy, Roma.
contribute?
Nothing at the moment.
Okay. Well, we'll keep going. Please, at any point in time as we go through the webinar this evening, please feel free to add in, put your hand up.
Ellen has asked, what about the passive aggressive? Not showing up.
What about the passive aggressive when it's showing up? So Ellen, can you say more? Are you able to contribute if Adele takes you off
Okay,
mute?
hi. Yeah, I
Hi.
was just wondering, hi, one thing that I have observed up close is passive aggression. So it's that same energy, but with health. So it's actually, I find,
Yeah.
much more hidden at first, but it's
Mm-hmm.
just as strong. It's just not so active. So I was wondering, I presume that would be part of this space as well.
That can be a beautiful example of the combination of the controlling with the distant.
Right. Yeah, that's what
Yeah, so it's interesting to look, is the passive aggressive, just a combination with some complying elements, but the primary element is being hidden. But of course, it's not hidden. So that's when you can get a dance that's happening between a couple of combinations.
And I'm very interested in learning more about that interaction, because I do find that, well, there may be sometimes a dominance. Often it is a mixture of multiple stances.
Yes,
Yeah, and
I
so
agree. Yeah.
helping them get to see that, that's where the work is, because until they can actually see it, especially if it's a distance controlling combination, because the distance is in a way avoiding contact with the fact that they're like this. So you can see there's a fear of discovering the defense structure.
And sometimes also too, Ellen, the conversations that I've had are with people who have this. The primary story was, do not upset the apple cart. That avoid conflict at any cost. And the passive aggressive, as we talked about last time, is that when my needs go unmet because I'm so busy and I've spent so much time meeting the needs and helping others and supporting others to have achieve their needs, and when my needs go unmet, at some point in time the resentment kicks in, and then suddenly you go, and if you think that complying actually isn't controlling, then watch when a high complying hasn't had their needs met, and suddenly it just whacks over into the controlling, and it takes people by surprise. Yeah. And so
Thank you, that's helpful.
what appears originally as being, complying can flip. If that makes any sense.
It does. Thank you.
Yeah,
and that's a beautiful illustration of the control comply dynamic going on inside our own character structure.
I was going to say, Meryl's asked a great question as well. Sarah, I've sent that on to you if you'd like to comment on it, about the self-reflection.
When we are irritated by these statements, does this mean we recognize these traits in ourselves? Well, it might be an opportunity to recognize them. Often we are very activated in something that we haven't yet owned in ourselves. So that's a fairly common response. So, but I'd love to hear more from you, Meryl. Are you happy if we unmute you so you could speak to it?
Oh, she has no microphone. So that's a no,
Ah,
Sarah.
right. Okay.
Thank you, Meryl.
All right.
Yeah, but hopefully that's what you were meaning, Meryl. That if I get activated by something like that, that it can be, if you, for instance, if you're reading these descriptions of the body posture, and you're having reaction thinking about people like that, then a good question might be, so what's your relationship with taking your own authority and taking up the space that belongs to you? So we can have a rejecting relationship with the things that we're hungry for. So that it's a good question to actually just explore. So what's my relationship with being that way? That can help us discover more about our relationship with power and authority.
Great, thank you. And I've opened the line up for Kelly. Kelly, you had your hand up. What question would you like?
I just wanted to give an example just in terms of the physiology when the controlling takes over. So for me, or it's really the heart racing, the sweaty palms, if you like, the nerves, just overuse of energy and things just taking up, way too much energy in that sense. So I just wanted to give an example, really.
Beautiful. Beautiful,
yeah,
Kelly. You've just gone into the next one. So, that's part of the internal felt sense, but how it shows up physiologically is through the sweaty palms and heart racing and, the reddening of the face and stuff like that.
Yes.
The other one that Andy
Yeah.
had to offer was, when you see the hands clasped behind the head. Have you noticed that as well from controlling types? That whole
absolutely.
leant back thing, what you were saying, Rome, about the feet on the table.
Hands clasped behind the heads. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, very much so.
So it's good to realize that something has been activated in the person when this is happening, so there's a neediness that's arisen when it gets activated, because it's so easy to go into judgment about it.
And how do we show up in that space, And this is where we were saying, okay, in terms of the felt sense, just to notice our own felt sense when we see that happening in somebody else. Because I know for me, when my controlling gets activated, there is a sense of discomfort, or there's a worry. I am worrying about, am I showing up as being weak, or am I losing control here, or there's that sense of, frustration because it isn't going fast enough.
It's all go to hell in a handbasket in a moment.
Yeah, so I better get my hands on the wheel and take control here, because it's about to go down the tubes. Yes, although that's feeling that sense of impotence, that I'm just not going. I'm out of control here, or it's out of control, and what that brings up in terms of vulnerability and feeling exposed, and that whole sense of insecurity and fear, and I work with some amazing leaders, as I know all of us do, and when to be able to sit and to allow somebody to have this felt sense and to explore it, because Kelly, as you said, there's amazing energy here, and quite often a lot of that energy can be wasted because it's wasted on turning and spinning the wheels, and the focus is on the threat or the problem. And remember, when we actually move into the creative orientation, our focus starts to shift to the vision and the purpose and the outcomes, and creating outcomes that matter to us, to all of us, for the greater good. Whereas when this sense of self, this moving against, as Sarah so beautifully put, when I've gone into competition with whatever it is in order to get the attention that I might need, then this inner felt sense that the focus becomes on me. And these are just some of the descriptors.
I think the other thing, Roma, that's important too about controlling is this is what's underneath. So if they get in contact with, or if I get in contact with my real felt sense, that's what it is. But there's often a layer of numbness or not feeling, or, you know, like feeling. What's a feeling? I don't even have the language. I don't even know how to identify it. So it can actually be masked by that sort of numb, non-feeling. I don't even have the language for it, which is interesting because it's so fearful for them to be in touch with anything that would indicate weakness.
Hmm.
Got time for one more comment
So,
from Miriam, ladies?
sure. Please,
Miriam,
Miriam,
go
hi.
ahead.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes?
Okay. I was just curious about the hands behind the clasp behind the head because I can sort of see what you're saying, but on the other hand, for me, and I have to admit that I do sometimes tell some of my clients to try that because by putting your hands, clasping them behind your head, you're actually opening up your chest, and a great deal of the tension that comes for me when I'm in my controlling mode, or what I've seen also some clients who are in that space, moves away. You sort of kind of open up and relax by doing that. So I found it interesting that you sort of said that that is actually typical of controlling motion.
For me, Miriam, it's very much around what is the intent here, you know. And remember, when controlling or complying or protecting are really overused, or the strength is actually running us and has become compulsive, or we're over dialing it in some way, that there is a sense of self-preservation. And so the hands clasped behind the head and the puffiness of the chest is in a sense, it's the difference is when I'm hearing and I'm imagining that when you're asking people to do that is to actually open it up and to make themselves more available.
That's
Whereas
right.
with
There's
whereas
a
with
degree of
this,
vulnerability by doing that as
yeah,
well.
yeah. Whereas I think the descriptor that, well, for me, certainly the images that I have in my mind is this remembering that controlling and arrogance, you know, particularly autocratic, sits quite close to arrogant, right next door to arrogance. And so there's this puffing up of the chest, and it's almost like an inflated sense of self,
Mm.
right?
There's also Roman, there's also a degree of armoring, you know, so I'm putting
Yes.
on my armor. So if it's like a chest plate that's protecting me, then that's very different from opening.
Mm.
Does
Yeah.
that help,
Okay.
Miriam? That
Yeah,
just that
thank you.
sometimes it's a nuance, and energetically there's a difference.
Okay.
Yeah, energetically, when we're talking about high controlling and hand clasp behind the head, it is this sense of overinflation, and I am doing that because it is a sense of protection. It's an armoring. Remember, it's the warrior. It's the, you know, it's the power mask, and it's the warrior mask.
Mm.
And so I'm puffing it up so that people can't get in underneath, in a sense.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. Let's move on to some of the emotions um, connected with controlling. Over to you, Sarah.
Ha ha ha! I think it's so funny. I've been reflecting on these today because I was working with a client yesterday who had very strong controlling tendencies. um, I noticed my own get activated.
Timely.
Well, I find that that's true in life. Often, you know, when we're about to speak about something, I have experiences that bring it to light.
Mm.
So you can see, actually, if we look across the quality of these emotions, we actually see in the first half the kind of rising up, if you like. So the emotions around anger and frustration and pressure and tension. And often what happens with somebody with this controlling tendency, because there's so much a can-do, action-oriented, make things happen, that then people start depending upon them and relying upon them. And if you understand that the driver underneath is a neediness, actually to overcome the fear of weakness, the fear of vulnerability, then it's almost as if that is being used, so they're getting even further away from their needs met. So this sense of resentment building, and also to some extent with the controlling tendency, there's kind of an underlying desire to be wanted or needed or liked, but not through looking weak or soft, but from being, a good action-oriented person. So then with awareness coming of that strength and that anger and that, tipping over the edge, is feeling bad about the way that it's having an impact, but not being able to do it any differently. So there's this guilt arises, and this sense of impotence of being stuck in this way of being that's actually not getting the needs met. So there's, with that comes a sense of humiliation and shame around the needs and the unresolvability of the situation. So it can also spiral down into these things of feeling threatened and powerless, and very alone in the struggle. So, that thing that I said earlier before, if it's to be, it's up to me. Imagine living with that as an ongoing cycle again and again and again. That there's a tremendous aloneness, and also potential wondering, is it sustainable? And so with that comes a vulnerability, because if I can't keep this up and keep this going, what will happen to me? So you can get a sense of the struggle that's present.
And often, that in very senior leaders in organizations, and if you tap into your own sense of controlling, that whole fear of failure, which, and even a mistake sometimes can lead to, the humiliation or the shame, or just this feeling of complete threat.
Yeah, that was an interesting example. The client that I was mentioning yesterday was, high and controlling and being incredibly autocratic and expansive and pontificating, and to the point that he was actually disconnected with everybody. And so it was starting to look a little bit bizarre. And so trying to help him find his ground and find his place, then going into a sense of humiliation that somebody had to help him, so that he felt he demonstrated some weakness. So then getting angry about the humiliation. And so, this terrible, just watching
reactive
with a very,
loop.
Reactive loop, and just even people trying to help was not helpful. So it's, really
I remember
tough.
us talking about this whole thing around guilt too, because I know that there are sometimes when my controlling, has got me, and then I'll go into the high control mode or the high perfect mode, and then suddenly go, oh my God, I've done it again, foot and mouth disease, or just taking charge and taking control. And then that's how, then that, the questioning around, have I hurt their feelings, and blah, blah, blah. And all of that can just lead into this story around, the beliefs and assumptions about that I can't let go, because if I let go, it's going to turn to custard. And at the same time, that I'm not good enough because I've taken control again. And so this, got a great story in a minute, because we've got a great example. So I'll leave it till then, and we'll come into having a look at how does this show up. That we've been talking now about what's going on internally. And then, of course, what happens is that we then those of us that have got controlling, or those of us that have got clients that default into controlling when the needs are dialed up, or when the fear is dialed up, or when the angst gets them. This sense of power. And I think, Sarah, you talked about a pontification, and that there's an energy, there's a strong, often very strong. My father had a very strong booming voice, and I know that he his default was very much around controlling and protecting. Really funny, isn't it? I wonder where I got mine from. And also to that sense of that with complying, we've got this sense of a higher pitch. The pitch and the tone is much higher and sort of more lilting in complying, whereas in controlling it can be a bit more booming and lower pitched, coming from the chest or expanded, and even sometimes a bit more monotone. And this sense of commanding, just this, and often with the gesticulation with the hands, and kind of authoritative or parentals. Anyone, you want to add anything more to that? You can see the strident and the deliberate and sometimes loud. Anybody got any more that you want to add to this? Or Sarah, if you want to add any more to the voice aspect, how it shows up.
Teresa's actually asked a question. I'm curious about any experiences of transcending controlling by arriving in the confident space of vulnerability. I think, this you can hear in this conversation, if I link it back through the voice piece, the voice, it's like you can actually feel that it's taking control or taking charge of the situation. And there's a tension in it. Because when somebody takes command and they're actually in contact with their vulnerability, it actually just has a richness to it. It's actually all encompassing and all embracing, and so it has a welcoming feel, as opposed to when it's strident, and you can actually feel the angst that sits behind it. And I think what often happens is, on the receiving end, it becomes difficult to do anything other than comply or go along with it. Whereas when it's vulnerable and it's open-hearted and it's full-bodied, there's an invitation to come into the space with.
Yeah, and actually, I think that one of the things for me is that as with whether it's complying or controlling or protecting, and sometimes it's a bit harder to find it, especially when we are over-dialed in the controlling area and indeed in the protecting area, is that there underneath all this there's a huge heart, and that acknowledgement of the open-heartedness, and allowing them to access that and to slow down long enough to actually recognize that, and even in that to feel vulnerable in that space, because of course that's where some of the big courage and some of the big energy and the ability to bust through and to challenge the status quo and to be the one who can, or the champion of the team. There's this enormous energy underneath here, and I think we're going to go into this when we start tapping into some of the gifts and some of the gifts and the strengths in this area, and we can allow, and people can actually just drop the need to be in control and tap into, how can I get results in another way? Is it possible for us to get results in another way without it actually being me alone, who through my own delusion feel that the only way that we can get these results is by me actually driving or being in charge or being in control or being the perfect one. I'm not sure. Does that help with your question? Sorry, who is it?
She's on mute. It's
Teresa.
Yeah,
Teresa. Yeah.
I'll take her off mute.
Am I off mute?
Yeah, you are.
Yes, you
Hello?
are.
Yeah. I appreciated the sharing of the experiences just in my own personal journey and also working with others. Getting them to that open-heartedness and that vulnerability has been quite a big breakthrough. So I just appreciated hearing from your perspective, because I know on the previous slide, vulnerability was probably kind of buried under a reaction of controlling versus the kind of the gift that it gives. So I appreciate the way you articulated it. I love the invitation piece.
Thanks.
I think that's if you recall that in the character structure formation sequence, first it's try with an open heart. That fails, and so you go into the power structure, and so you start to attach the vehicle to get your needs met is from the power structure. And by the way, the heart let you down. So this it's like there isn't a strong belief that the heart would actually support you. So that's the real dichotomy, because it's like becoming hard-hearted. I can't be in contact with my heart. I've got to be hard-hearted because that's the way I'm going to survive. And so the whole idea of opening up to the heart is such a difficult tension. But when people can actually see it and get a perspective on it, so they can still retain all of the assets that they've got, so it can be safe then to be in contact with your heart. So I think it's lovely what you're raising.
Thank you.
We've got time to hear from Ellen, ladies.
Sorry?
So I was going to say, have you got time to hear from Ellen, or?
Okay, just one more and then we'll keep moving. So Ellen, yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I sent this one a little while ago. Actually, I was just wondering, would you say people who are very controlling are on the higher risk spectrum for burnout?
Well, certainly that some of the medical research has gone on that particularly those with high perfectionism have there's a high correlation to cardiovascular disease. And so you can imagine, I mean, again, I think that there is a lot of studies these days around, the relationship between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system and the whole aspect around disease and the stress that people are under, and how does it show up? Does it show up as blood pressure, as cardiovascular disease? Does it show up as some other form of disease or depression or some kind of nervous disposition?
Because I can feel it a lot with some of the clients that I have who are very trying to be controlling but barely clinging on by their basically their fingertips.
Yeah.
Very thin line.
Certainly you see that a lot when you see the culture surveys, which have a very strong controlling tendency. It's a very stress-producing working environment. But equal, different forms of stress, if you like, from all the reactive tendencies. They all have their own version of stress.
Oh, right. Yeah. Thank you.
And I mean, and I know many of you, I mean, one of the things that when you're doing and you're sitting with people, that the privileged position that we're often in, because people will tell us things I mean, how many of you've had people who say, I've never told anybody this, or the only other person that knows this is my spouse about me? And so often we'll find, people start to reveal, and then you can start going, well, I'm curious that it allows us, when we go to somebody else with a similar profile or they've got a similar spike, to hold that space with enormous compassion. And as Sarah said earlier, without the judgment. So I've now put up the new slide, which is around words and some of the language that we use. And remember that part of the compulsion, part of the core equation is that we give ourselves away. And when we are in one of the dialed up spaces, whether it's protecting, controlling, or complying, that often we can hear the words and listen out for the words, I must, I should, I have to. And underneath that, there's I must, I should, I have to do this, show up in this way, or else something bad will happen to me. So Sarah and I had fun playing with some of these words. What are some of the words when controlling's highly dialed up? The words that we can, and I catch myself with these sometimes as, the always and the never, which are the absolutes. And so this is this sense of, always or never or everybody. So it gives that sense of, power and potency. I even feel myself going like this, and I've got my arms out as I'm speaking this way. It's imperative, or without a doubt, or I insist, or I require, or this is just not negotiable. You're wrong. And I'm right in a sense. Or it's going to be a total disaster. So there's a sense of demand and resoluteness, and often accompanied by the non-verbals and the gestures and the postures and the gesticulating and the booming, or the very specific kind of cutting through language. Anything else to add there, Sarah?
I think you've done a marvelous job.
You should see me at the other end here. Of course, the behaviors. So how about you take over in terms of the behaviors? What are we avoiding and what are we seeking? How we seek relief from symptoms of discomfort or worry.
Yeah, I think keeping in mind that with the controlling, there's an absolute fear of weakness of any kind. So absolute need to be strong, indomitable, to come out on top, to have, the power to take charge, take control, make things happen. So anything that would undermine that is what sits in this avoiding category. So a mistake is intolerable. Failing or inadequacy cannot be courted. And this means I can't see my own inadequacy or my own failings, because if I do, that would make me weak and vulnerable. So I can't consider that I wouldn't succeed, that incompetence would ever come anywhere near me. I'd be allergic to that. So actually a bit concerned about other people who I might get infected by their incompetence or the lack of success, or their undermining my success. So the need to be in charge and wanting people around who know how to be in charge. So if I have to delegate, they have to be like me too. And intolerant of any others having power over me, because that would bring me undone. I would therefore be submitting to, and that is not allowed. So you can see this avoidance of anything that would undermine me coming out on top, me being in charge, me having the power in the situation. I think describing it like that is just helping you get in touch with the compulsive element and how deep the need is. And I think it also helps, well, certainly for me, it helps me be a bit more compassionate if I understand how much it has got the person where this is showing up. And of course, I recognize it in myself and trying to practice being more compassionate with myself so I can get in touch with my own mistakes and inadequacy and incompetence and all those sorts of things. So desperately seeking relief from any symptoms of discomfort or worry. And so you can see this, as I said before, this kind of hard-hearted, just an embodiment of strength and power and winning. So this uncompromising, comparing so that I can work out how I'm better, or where I can be better, where I can have the competitive edge. So this very authoritative over people, demanding, rigid, stubborn, and this, as I've said many times, this intolerance for softness or weakness. And actually, manipulating through my own capacity to achieve results or mobilize resources or get things done. So if I've done you a favor, then you owe me, so I have power over you. So often using that sense of competence and capability as a storehouse of favors that can be used when needed. So there is also sometimes this being kind, but there's an underlying agenda, and being helpful, but there's an underlying agenda. So it's not really an open-hearted helpfulness or offering. It's actually a brokering kind of quality. And sometimes we don't notice that until later, and then we realize, oh, that was a contract. That actually wasn't a service. That was actually a contract. So
Yeah,
those are some of the ways the behaviors show up.
I remember working with a leader once, and that the leader actually had engendered or fostered a sense of false loyalty and was totally unaware that there was this sense of false loyalty, because would reward behavior that supported them getting the leader themselves getting results. And and it was all about focus on me, focus, aren't I great because I got these results. And and would not publicly acknowledge others, but would then acknowledge them behind the scenes in order for them to keep doing that. But ultimately, the game was, the main game was that to get the results so that they looked good. And there was that whole sense of false loyalty in the team, because people were afraid to speak up or to disagree or whatever, because that they felt that they wouldn't have a job. And it was a very powerful environment. And I think some of that, in terms of the intentions which we're moving on to now, is that, remember that here we're talking about results focus. It's on the task side of the framework, of the leadership circle framework, that we are looking here at task and getting results. So there is the capacity to get results, but the tendency when controlling is high, is strong in a person's profile, and it's coming from that sense of needy will, that the focus tends to be on the immediate result. Because if I don't get those results, then it means something about me in terms of maybe being inadequate or not okay or weak or not, you're not in charge. So in reality, my focus is a self-interest one. It tends to be, whilst we can speak about the greater good, I tell myself that it's about the greater good. I actually even tell others that it's about the greater good. But underneath that is about what it means about me and how I survive in this situation. And I have extensive evidence that all my intentions are towards the greater good and not towards me. And I actually can point out and give stories and examples. And I know this leader that I just referred to was great at that. But underneath it all was highly vulnerable, was highly insecure, and was incredibly stressed out and worried about what does it mean about me if the result, it will reflect badly on me. And so underneath this, there's this sense of being deeply resentful that this is actually the case, and I can't afford to see the truth, because if I do, it'll bust me wide open, and I can't in any way show any form of weakness in that, because I've got the story that says, if it's to be, it's up to me, or I'm the one that has been trusted with this, or I'm the reliable pair of hands that's going to get us across the line, which of course is the compulsive and the reactive tendency when it comes deep down in underneath, is to get the result. But what comes along with that is the baggage about what it means about me. And of course that leads us beautifully into what tends to be at risk. Because if I don't get those immediate results, well, then what's at risk for me that they will find out? And Sarah, I'd invite you into this to share this part if you would like to.
Oh, I think you're doing a great job. But yeah, I mean, it's you can almost feel now that, what's at risk is the fear that my weaknesses will come to the surface, that my imperfections, my limitations, my shortcomings, the parts of me that are not okay, my inadequacies, that I'm not good enough, that I'm not a winner, that I'm vulnerable, I'm afraid of failing. So all of these things that are kind of, well, they're not kind of, they are in my Pandora's box. That'll all open up, and then people won't admire me, and I'll be just like everybody else. And if I'm just like everybody else, how will I get my needs met? Because what I've learned is that I have to stand out, I have to be number one, I have to be on top in order for my needs to get met. I have to find a way to get to the top of the pile, because nobody will meet my needs unless I stand out and can actually make sure I get my needs met. So what's at risk are all of the things that make me just like everybody else.
Which is not great when when the whole idea is that I'm the one that stands out here, so I'm only worthwhile, I'm only safe, I'm only secure if this goes through the the perfect. I have the highest standards, I produce premium quality. And of course, when it comes to driven, that I work harder, faster, and longer. This delusion that that we will get the result if we work harder, faster, and longer. And of course, the world outside us has changed now, and it's much more complex. And there are a whole lot more stakeholders and needs and interests, and a whole lot of things that I need to take care of and to think about. And working harder, faster, and longer doesn't necessarily guarantee that how I once showed up and got me a result is actually going to get me the result in the future. So, but because it did, I just drive others, and I'm always busy. That always busyness, and there's a sense of impression, giving the impression that and I'm the go-to person here. I make the decisions and I get results, and others admire me, and I'm in charge, and it's my way. That my sense of self-worth and security and safety comes from that. So in actual fact, the energy underneath this and the underlying belief and assumption is that I'm the one, I'm the star here. Very, very powerful. It can actually get us to that place and that position. And then, of course, what Kelly talked about was this whole sense of energy and the amount of energy that it takes in order to keep holding that. The amount of energy that it takes to keep holding that amount of stress and tension, and the fear that comes with it underneath, this underlying belief and assumption that unless I do this, I am not worthy or safe or secure. And ironically, are very reliable in many ways, are the reliable one, and don't often put their hand up and ask for help. Here's a great example. This is an example of a leader in a team that we were asked to come in and work with some 18 months ago. Individual who was recognized as being a reliable, safe pair of hands, male, mid to late 40s, in an IT services business, moved family to Australia from overseas in order to take up the role, and was handpicked to come onto the team to support a massive customer-focused transformation. And I didn't do the debrief, but one of my colleagues did the debrief. And I mean, I happen to know this individual very well because we've done a lot of work over the time. I wasn't privy to the debrief, but I was privy to what this leader shared many times in open forums, um, and actually even shared what had gone on in some of the debrief and what influences had shaped how the way he shows up, and had mentioned that this love for delivery, this love for operations, and in actual fact is in charge of the operations part of the business, and love for delivery, love for operations, very fast, very quick, can put out fires really quickly, seen as reliable and successful, by the way, and yet always says there's this underlying sense of angst, this underlying sense that second guessing himself and worried that he would screw up at any moment, and if that happened, that would be the end. He would lose his job. Also quite open and sharing about that one of three boys, and the history of depression in the family, and very domineering, very, very domineering mother for whom nothing was ever good enough. And that, there's absolutely no pleasing. And so during this leader's journey with this profile shared, this love for getting results, this love for being in charge and being able to get onto things quickly, and also being accountable, being willing to be accountable, and this affinity for the idea of other people being accountable for their behaviors and for their results. And some of his breakthrough moment came through because he started to learn to be, and I think that we were talking about it before, I think it was Teresa or Miriam or one of us was talking about, this whole sense of vulnerability and how do we help people get in underneath vulnerability. And he started to own up to he was actually very open in many ways. Started to own up and started to share in a very vulnerable way, how fallible he felt, and then as he began his journey, you can see that his courageous authenticity is quite high by others' views. So he does share, he does open up. And as he began to share his journey about the creative, he actually started to hold really, really high expectations for other people to come through. So I'm giving you some of the context here. And what really got up his nose was that when people would not be accountable for the result, and there was a history of this in the business, that people were expectant, that people would wait for other people to tell them what to do. And of course, that really infuriated him. And the breakthrough moment came for him where he came into the coaching session and was furious because time and time and time again, people had let him down. Of course, they were letting the team down. They were letting a whole lot of other people down, but this was this whole personalizing around it. And, he went into a rant and a rave and started to attack, the whole program and the whole framework. And he at one stage, he suddenly realized that he was ranting and raving, and that what he realized is that, and with the help of the coach, he started to identify some of the beliefs and assumptions that his monologue relied upon, and he got down in underneath through the what's at risk process, that unless I'm in control, that the results, that there won't be the results, and that other people are not capable, they're not reliable, and what he really got to was, unless they change, I can't change. I can't change the situation. And so soon after that, he was able to slow down enough in order to be able to then realize that part of his critical stuff that comes out is actually keeping people away. And he had some really, he had some really great insights about, if I'm not in control, everything will fail. And if it fails, I've failed. And if I fail, then of course this links back into this whole thing about, that for a highly domineering parent, who am I? So there was some beautiful, and this, just to watch this man's heart open up and to become more open and to become, and the default kicks in. It gets him again and again and again. But what I've noticed is over time, he's beginning to, no longer is it wrong or is it bad. It's this sense of, this has served me. This has served me well. It's got me to where I am now. And then the realization, I can't keep going like this. And by the way, it's not serving other people either. If you look on his profile, you can see this whole sense of, high drive, high perfect, high controlling, sense of highly critical, but also this spike in pleasing. So, just the realization that this structure is not serving me any longer, and that and so through purpose and vision, through those conversations, through slowing down, through encouraging, through engaging with other people, starting to use the purpose and vision, and then slowing down enough, and now has a team around him that are themselves a safe pair of hands, and having conversations from the creative orientation, and still needing to fix it, still needing to put out fires, I was with them all today, by the way, and having the conversation about how we still need to put out the fires. And then from what perspective are we, yes, we need to put out the fires, and from what perspective are we taking on the fires, and how are we actually seeing it from a higher perspective so that we can anticipate some of the fires before the fires even start. And when we do need to put them up, we can be there, but then we go back up into a more strategic level of thinking and connecting the dots so that we can keep putting in systems and people into place to allow us to become more strategic and innovative, and indeed more customer focused, where we can have the conversations that really matter, and when we need to, we can dip in there choicefully. So remember that the whole framework around the leadership circle is around assisting our clients through awareness to become more choiceful, and in so doing to become more effective, both in terms of results as well as relationships. Because at the end of the day, the investment it can be a huge investment, especially if we're talking across a leadership system. And we have more than one leader that we're supporting across a leadership system. The investment can be huge. And of course, the expectation is a return on this investment, both in terms of the way people are showing up and the relationships that we have, as well as the performance of the business. And these conversations are alive and well where this leader works. And it's quite humbling, actually, to sit and be. It's a privilege to sit and be in the space and to hear the vulnerability and the openness, and to hear them sharing and owning when the default has grabbed me. And then how can we support each other in this space? And what's changed for him is that other people, that a common language, the leadership circle introduces this common language for people to understand the reactive and the creative orientation and the integral. And then to actually have the courageous and open conversations that matter to the business, because we become clear on the purpose and vision. And together as a team, we can start working, and we can mentor and develop not only our people, but we can do that with each other at the same time. So you can see just a very, very energetic profile here. And a really safe pair of hands, and the one that is the reliable one, the one and only safe pair of hands, is how this amazing leader came to this country and now realizes that there are a whole lot of more safe and reliable hands as well, and doesn't have to do it all on his own.
And finally, he can get some peace.
Yeah, just a lovely human being who actually is, when the controlling and then that spike in critical and arrogance there is actually, people stay away. You watch it; it becomes it's a repellent, and then actually is self-fulfilling prophecy, because the results don't come when that compulsion is let go of, and more of the vulnerability comes through, and more of the interest and curiosity and that whole courageous aspect comes through. The desire for people to get close and to learn and to understand, and is an attractor. So I'm going to be interested to see this leader's profile in when we do the remeasure, because it's really working it. Yeah.
Roma, Andrew has a question he'd like to put.
Andrew.
Hi, Roma.
Hi, Andrew. How are you doing?
I am very well, thank you. Well, you'll probably hear me croaking a bit, but I'm okay. I just interested hearing you talk about that case, and I guess many of us would kind of come across similar cases. I can think of several people just like that, I think. My question was really, how quickly do you think that there's I get exactly what you're saying around how you begin to change the behavior in the team context. I'm kind of interested in what you think, and maybe even how quickly sometimes you have seen the underlying mindset, tendencies, beliefs change over time, as represented in the self-assessment. So interesting if you just finished there on your own interest in seeing what happens in the retest. Would you expect the self-assessment to move much?
I think, thank you for saying that, because I think context, every 360 that I've ever done has got a degree of reflection of context. I mean, it can't not be, that what's going on in the business, what are the pressures, who asked, who gave the feedback, and then the leadership circle particularly is designed to not only reflect that context, but to also to help get in underneath some of the beliefs and assumptions in our own stories. And so, that our story, that unless the leader themselves and we ourselves actually start to pick up the pen, and we are encouraged to, and we're supported to, and there's big enough reason for us that we've bumped up against our own structure for so long that we know it's no longer working, that we start to pick up our own pen and start to author some of the story. That's when I really start to see the change happening. But it's when we're rewarded, or when we believe that we're going to be rewarded for continuing to do the same behavior. I've seen a young man that I've worked with now for almost 15 years, and I mean, it was astounding to watch to see the profile shift. But you could also see it on him from, we did leadership. So he had done many other 360s before, and then he did the leadership circle, and he was shocked and he was really taken back by what it showed, because the other 360s hadn't showed him that. And he
Yeah.
worked on it. He really worked on it. And his profile is 90 plus percentile in every one of the 18 competencies now,
Right.
by
That's
others' view and his self view. And the reactive is well contained within the 50th percentile.
yeah.
But he worked at it, and he worked at his stories as well. There's
Yeah.
still some stories he needs to work on. So it does take time, but it also sometimes takes a shift in the context and the environment. I was
So over
with
what
another leader
period was that,
yesterday
Roma?
who
Sorry, Roma. Over
that
what
was
period
over
of time?
that was over 18 months.
Thank you.
And another leader that I was working with yesterday, who, Andrew, you probably knew too, because it was in an organization we worked in together when she first had her first profile, and it was highly reactive, highly reactive. She's
Yeah.
now in a different organization. She's now the head of the business unit that she's working in, and her profile again is another example of it, of, you know, well on the way, highly creative, and well on the way to integral.
Yeah. Okay. It's you
Yep.
know, I think often, and you know, I have seen some of those cases, and it's you know, it's amazing at every level, isn't it, when you see those personal transformations take place. I guess I worry a little bit sometimes that I don't know, I'm kind of running around in circles a bit here, but you know, the we can help the person in the context of their team, um, in the behaviors, but they kind of get it in the context of the team. But as you said, you know, it's the rewriting of the personal story that really creates the sustainable change over time.
Well, you
Um,
can hear the shift in meaning making. You can hear
yes,
the
yeah,
shift in
exactly.
the
Yeah,
perspective that they're beginning to take, and the relief that comes with that, the enormous relief and the freeing up of energy to be
yeah,
able to
yeah,
serve in a different way, right? So instead of it being self-serving my needs, it becomes much bigger and serving
right.
the greater good in the system. And you can and you can hear the shift beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess my experience is that self, when you've got, like in this case, where you've got such a strong self story around, you know, this desire and need for control, that I guess in my experience is the hardest of the self stories to change, really. I don't know, is that,
Mm,
would you guys have that
I don't
view?
know,
And that in
Sarah. What do
itself
you
is, you
think?
know, just an interesting
No,
story, but
I think it's to do with a convergence of things. So I find that clients who can link what we're doing here to their personal life as well as their business
yes,
life
yep,
accelerate the shift, because in their personal life they start to realize things,
absolutely.
especially if they connect it with their partner or their children. That means a lot more to them than the business world often. And so if they can make the connection across their whole life, then I find
Yeah,
a much accelerated and more deeper roots in the transformation.
yeah,
The
yeah,
other, the other thing is that if they have a pivotal event in the coaching, in the business context, that also accelerates it, because they have an experience that makes it black and white. It's, you know, so if they're fortunate enough to have something that really, you know, puts it into sharp contrast, that also accelerates it. I've watched also people who've made tremendous advancement over a period of time and then change bosses, and the boss can either accelerate it forward or reverse it.
yeah,
And then coaching them through the reversal that's where they get really deep roots, you know, because it's like the first round they had support, the second round it wasn't so supportive. So helping them work through the resistance and opposition creates deeper roots in the transformation. So I think there's many kind of contexts that can support or thwart it, if you like. The other thing is that I've had clients who are so hungry to resolve this conundrum that they feel, so they personally feel torn. And when they get the profile, it explains everything. And it's like almost like the dam busts and the water gushes and off they go. They've just been looking for something that would give them a mental model that could help them. You know, it's like they got it now in their minds as well as in their bodies. And those two things, when they can get it both in their mind and in their body, something very potent occurs.
And one of the things that I've noticed is when the center of gravity actually shifts, and I've picked up the pen, and either I now become the author of the chapters in my book. The previous chapters are there, and they weren't written by me. That I was following the script in a way because that's what's expected, and I'm a good leader, I'm a good commander, I'm a good soldier, or I'm a good, homemaker or peacemaker, or I'm the smart one. That is written by somebody else, and when I pick up the pen, it doesn't change those earlier chapters in the book. What happens is they no longer write me. They no longer actually, I'm no longer written by them. I'm no longer subject to them, but in fact, they inform me. They inform me of how I show up in a different way, so I can rely on those stories and dig back into them, because they can help me and they can help others. So I'm just very aware right now that we've actually, we're now running a little bit over time. So I'm just wondering, does that help you, Andrew?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, both
Cool.
of you. Yeah.
Okay.
Sarah, thanks, Rona.
Fabulous. So let's just move into some of the coaching strategies, because now we're shifting into how do we be? And Sarah, maybe what I'll do is I'll ask you if you can just go through these and tell me when you're ready, and you can go through these next few slides in relation to, the coaching strategies, and then we can close out the webinar.
Well, I think it's really important that we actually have compassion about how this came into being. So partly the way that we're designing these sessions is so that we can actually really get into the felt sense and what is the dilemma that somebody's experiencing, and to really get a sense of what it's like to be in that experience. And then when we can realize how it has served us, what we have learned, what we have gained, all that we have been enriched by having this, then we can actually start to look at what parts are supporting and what parts are thwarting. So it's only when we can actually start to see it, and this is particularly important with the controlling, that you can actually see that this doesn't indicate weakness or vulnerability. It actually just indicates some gifts that you've got, and now they're limiting you. So that getting in contact with its limits and really understanding our identification with it, and how we've made that who we are, and that there's more to us than just that. So that we're not trying to get rid of it, we're actually trying to celebrate it and embrace it, and actually just change our relationship with it. So in the forming of the character structure, it's a needy, compulsive relationship that we don't have line of sight to. But if we can have a line of sight to, and we can actually see how it has served us, and what is all the richness and the equipment and the enablement in it, and then the differentiation, so we can actually start to see what the compulsive is. And by the way, how that compulsivity actually pushes our need further away. So our need is getting less met by it than actually met. Then now the doorway opens to change the relationship with it, so that we can actually be deeply grateful, because in fact all the reasons why we're valued actually comes out of our reactive structure. It's just the way it limits us is the bit that we need to get a handle on. So making it safe to see and opening our hearts to what it is, then is the pathway. Because until we can have a good relationship with our reactive structure, we have a rejecting relationship with the parts that we need to see. So until we can actually change that, we're stuck. So that's the intent behind the.
And one of the tools that we provide you with, thank you, Sarah, is that one of the handouts that we give you in certification is this one that's called the gifts and the reactive. And I take this with me on every coaching session that I have, and sometimes I'll send it to a client afterwards, and just to help them get in underneath and to actually see that there are these enormous gifts and strengths in the reactive orientation, and that by tapping into them and by managing and dealing with the fear or the anxiety so that it doesn't have us, but we're managing it, we're working with it, allows these gifts and strengths to come through. And I won't go through all of this in detail with you. If you need it, we will PDF this up and we can send it to you. But on pages, it's actually in your current certification manual. And this webinar is being recorded in April. In your current certification manual, you can find the gifts and the whole aspect around balancing the skills and qualities with harvesting the shadow on page 15 of your certification manual. And of course, it gives us that page gives us a whole area of strategy to work with in relation to perfect, in relation to driven, again, claiming your true gift and harvesting your shadow. The same applies for ambition, claiming the gift and harvesting the shadow, as it does for autocratic. So as I said, those are on page 15 of your certification manual. I encourage you to go and have a look at that. And for those of you that are you do have access to this recording, and we're happy to send you a PDF version of this. And just finally, how do we meet them? When somebody with high controlling shows up, how do we meet them? How are they likely to show up? And hopefully this webinar this evening has helped you understand how they might be likely to show up when they're highly defensive, when they're highly protective. And then to notice, how do you best show up with them, and what's required of you, and what's required of you to help them sit in and be with and understand and help to reframe the relationship to the controlling in order to lean into it, in order to lean in and claim the gifts and work with the gifts, as distinct from pathologizing or making wrong or making bad. And often I see enormous relief on people's faces when they realize that it isn't about getting rid of it. In actual fact, it will allow them to get results in a far different way, much more sustainable, much more long-lasting, that their capability and their agility increases, and they can do that with reduced energetic cost, and the enormous relief that this gives. Sarah, would you like to talk through the last pieces about, the impact and the move, the near enemy move?
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. So if it's interesting with the controlling, because the way, if you go back to, we talked about near enemy in the certification. So the near enemy, just to refresh, is the thing that looks like, sounds like, feels like, and in fact, often what you will have is a controlling person. In fact, this diagram beautifully shows what can happen. They score themselves lower on the controlling and higher on the achieving, because in their minds, the controlling is actually about achieving. So that's in fact their rationalization for the way in which they're showing up. So they don't actually understand the limiting aspects of it. So this is how it can actually show up in the profile with this differentiation. So they're underestimating the impact that their controlling behavior is having on creating results. And it's often interesting because when you go into a conversation, that's where their frustration will be, like the person that Roma was talking through in the case study. So they're frustrated that it's not actually achieving what they really wanted to achieve. So that's a typical way that it shows up. And Roma, do you want to go through the correlations?
No, we won't tonight. Well, I mean, you know, well, yeah, if you just wanted that, it's interesting because the correlations are different. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, here, so what we're seeking to do, and I love this notion of following the pathway of least resistance. If people already have an orientation towards task, then they have a whole lot of mental models that support task orientation. So rather than trying to change all of these structures and actually work against their natural strengths, it's better to work with the structures that they have that are going to support the transition or the transformation. So it's about really how do they differentiate what is controlling versus achieving. So what is empowered achieving rather than controlling type achieving, so reactive type achieving. So when they can get this differentiation, then in fact that energy moves up and it fills the gap that they're looking or expecting to be filled in the achieving. So that's the way in which you can actually get a relatively easy pathway of change. Back to your comment, Andrew, you know, if you try to get a controlling person being good at relating and they've got low relating scores, that's going to be much harder for them than if you just help them move up to the achieving, because the achieving is what they identify very strongly with. And so it's how do you shift that relationship, the inner relationship with it, so that it grows up. And interestingly, one of the ways that you can do that, which you gave in your example, Roma, was with the achieving, growing up the capability around, for instance, mentoring and developing, because it has a task aspect to it, can help with the achieving. So you can pick, that's even like a pathway of least resistance that helps with the shift from controlling to achieving, which has a touch of the relating in it. So
with the focus on purpose and vision. So, you know, sharing, okay, because often high controlling will be clear on what the end goal is. It just tends to be much more me focused. So to bring that, to invite into the conversation, which means that a higher controlling will need to become a bit more curious and a bit more inclusive. And so one of the ways one strategy is to say to a high controlling, get your team together, get your trusted members of your team together and share, and you share thoughts about strategy and direction and vision and purpose, and then ask them what's their contribution, what do they see in this, and together we start to have these conversations about getting results, about achieving outcomes, and that just gradually and slowly, that togetherness. And yes, it might mean that you need to ask more questions or allow more silence and get curious about others having a voice in the purpose and vision and how we achieve outcomes together. And then gradually over time, as Sarah's saying, as we're doing this in service of the team's outcomes and service of the organization's outcomes, and you become the mentor or the guide in that space. That's using the path of least resistance, rather than asking them to go in and become hugely relating all of a sudden, which most of them are going to feel as touchy-feely. That was the word that was used today. Touchy-feely, or all this self-awareness stuff. You know, that there's still the focus is on getting the result. And then what starts to happen is they start to learn the relating skills, and slowly start to become more aware of the impact that they've been having. And so what you can see over time is that these strengths and the gifts begin to grow up into creative achieving. Systems awareness gets affected, and so you also start to see the relating and the self-awareness over time. Amazing, amazing how relaxed they can get into when they suddenly realize, wow, you know, you're not asking me to actually turn myself into something that, you know, is just not, doesn't come that naturally to me. But then accessing the passion that comes with that, and then of course that becomes more of an attractive force. So instead of having power over, we have power enablement, power together, power to achieve. The dictionary definition of power is the ability to do and create in its purest sense. So we have the power to achieve, to do, and to create together. And love this, just to finish off this evening, love this quote from Pema Chodron, which says, "Nothing ever goes away until it has taught us what we need to know." And so if we can hold the reactive as, this is the gift for us, it's the gift for all of us. We cannot not go through this stage of development. It serves us beautifully. We learn most of our skills and our experiences and our socialization in this stage of development. And we bring the best of that with us when the operating system evolves and shifts and grows into the self-authoring and the creative, and then moving towards the integral. So what goes away is that we are subject to it. It now becomes what we were once subject to can become an object of our reflection. It informs us. It no longer defines us. So, Sarah, anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think you've done a beautiful job.
And you too, thank you. And thank you, all of you, for your input this evening. Really enjoyed it. Our apologies, we have gone a bit over time. Please let us know any thoughts, any comments, email us. We're very, very happy to engage either by phone or Skype or email. And our next webinar is in fact on Adele, 4th of June, I think it is, isn't it?
Yes, I think that's right, Roma, on protecting.
4th of June on protecting. So in between times, there is an opportunity for those of you that can join us on the 15th of May. There is the opportunity to join us at the Leadership Circle Asia Pacific annual conference. And this year, the conference is on collective leadership. And I know many of you are already registered, and if you're not, I know that an invitation and a reminder was sent out to you yesterday. So we hope to see you there, and if not, we look forward to more time together. Oh, look, there you go, 14th, the 4th of June. More time together when we convene again for protecting, deep dive around the circle and look at protecting. So thank you, Sarah, for your insights, your experience tonight, and as always, and all of you, thank you for joining us, and Adele for putting on, for staying online with us tonight, and Pauline, I know that you've organized a number of these sessions for us, so thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
And if you have any other questions, please feel free to email them this evening or tomorrow.